Hey everyone, Rizwan Jagani here with another video of the week, and today I thought I was originally going to do a PSA type video, which I will probably save for at some point, but after what I kind of encountered at school yesterday, Tuesday essentially, I thought I would talk a little bit about what the intensity is like of a music major. And this is not a complaining, venting type video, this is just a little bit of insight as to how intense the program can be. So when you see me going crazy over learning a particular piece, or you see your fellow musician colleagues going crazy for something that has to do with their curriculum, this is kind of why. I found myself when I went back to Dallas for winter break and I went overseas to Pakistan, I was explaining a lot of what my curriculum entailed. And while I have done a week in the life of Rizwan music student video, which you can check out up here or at the end of the video, it didn't really go into much detail of what exactly I did as a music master student. So I figured I'm going to break this into a few categories. So I am in 4 performance-based classes, and those are one-on-one lessons with my teacher David Harding, repertoire class with Tatiana Chamis, chamber music, and orchestra. First thing, lessons. Those usually happen once a week for about 1 hour. If Professor Harding is out of town for 1 week, the week after when he returns, we usually have double lessons. And lessons are quite intense because you're going over things regarding technique, regarding our repertoire, all in one. And the way Professor Harding works is he's very detail oriented, so we'll basically take like one phrase at a time and go through it in the lesson, making sure I get everything in tune, making sure I'm producing the right sound. And if I'm not doing well in the lesson, sometimes it can get a little bit frustrating. Right now, I'm currently redoing my technique and changing things, how I hold with the left hand, how I do things with the right hand. So my Tuesday lesson was essentially going over a 4-note phrase because I was trying to get the hang of basically what he wanted me to do with my left hand, and I was beating myself up for it in the middle of the lesson. So that can be quite unnerving at times, and then basically when you're done with the lesson, you don't really feel like touching the viola. And I talked to Professor Harding afterwards. He's like, take a break, soak in the knowledge, and then go back with a clear, quiet mind. And that is also something I'm continuously working on. Isolating my focus on what I need to do. Example being, if I'm working on tonation, don't look at the score for the notes that I'm tuning. Memorize those notes, and then just look at your fingers and see what they need to do. Is my 3rd finger landing on the fingerboard the way it needs to? Am I doing the pattern correctly? All these little details that I do in my lessons that then translate to the practice room, which I'll talk about after. Second, repertoire class with Tatiana Chamis. So repertoire class is essentially the tools and tricks that you need to audition for an orchestra. Every class begins with a 1 or 3 minute bow, which is essentially an exercise that you sort of distribute the bow over the string for about a minute or 3 minutes. This is essentially a condensed warm-up, and it essentially allows you to be aware of the sound that you're about to create. You put the bow on the string with the same amount of intensity as though you were about to begin a big piece, but instead of drawing it across the string immediately, you prolong the movement for about a minute or 3 minutes, depending on what we feel like doing that day. Immediately after, we do what's called a concerto start. Typically in orchestra auditions, you have a concerto and then you also have excerpts. So when we do the concerto, the idea is to sort of present ourselves as though we're about to enter the audition. So we go off to the side of the room, enter the room, play the concerto, and then usually Professor Thomas asks us, what did we feel? What is something that we can do better? What is something that we need to consider for next time? We all do this in front of our colleagues and in front of her. And then we will either A, work collectively on an excerpt that is new, or we will play for each other an excerpt that we have been working on. So right now we're doing Mozart Symphony 35 and the 4th movement of Mahler Symphony 1, which is what we're doing in the next orchestra cycle. And it also, just like lessons can be intense, the only thing is it's not one-on-one. But we are learning from another teacher who also happens to be the 2nd chair violist of the Pittsburgh Symphony. Chamber music. This semester I am in a quintet, which is violin, viola, double bass, oboe, clarinet, unlike the string quartet I was doing last semester. So we rehearse about 1 to 2 times a week for about an hour, hour and a half, and then we have a weekly coaching with one of the faculty members of CMU. And It's a lot to do if you've not done a lot of chamber music. I'm glad that I'm finally gotten acclimatized to what chamber music entails. The only thing is the piece that I'm doing is quite difficult. It's the Prokofiev G minor quintet. So I have a lot of little kinks and things I need to work out on my own. That way I am ready for an effective rehearsal, which then translates to a good coaching and will eventually translate to a good performance on the concert stage. The fourth thing is orchestra. These are usually 2-week cycles. Unlike some schools, they actually meet every single week. In the case of CMU, it's a little different. We have 2 weeks of rehearsals for 2.5 hours each, Tuesday to Friday. So that's 4 days a week. Then we have a dress rehearsal on the day of the concert and then the concert. And those happen every 3 weeks depending on how the circumstances within the academic calendar. And so another thing we have to make sure that we are prepared for every single rehearsal. The last concert we did Rachmaninoff's Symphony 2, which had this nasty viola part in the second movement, and we got nailed for it because we weren't all prepared. So the level of preparedness that we need to have to make sure our first rehearsal is almost as good as the concert, which can be unnerving sometimes if you are not used to playing such difficult repertoire. But of course, we will move to the part afterwards, which is like the free time. Now we will transition to the academic portion. I am in 4 classes this semester. Alexander Technique, which is a body awareness class that meets once a week. Score reading for non-pianists, which is essentially taking a large orchestral score and condensing it to a piano score so you can play that. And that's a skill that I want to learn, plus it also gets my piano chops back up and running. Then I'm also in the Key to Beethoven, which is a Beethoven sort of analysis class based on the types of keys that he wrote his pieces in, like what is the message that he was conveying in those pieces. And then the last class is editing and mastering, which is a part 2 of the sound recording class I took last semester. Each class has its own demands, so depending on what the class is, like for example my Beethoven class, I have listening, I have essays that are due once a week, and each class meets at different times, so I have to make sure I'm prepared for each class. And it usually means, for example, a class like score reading, that it's a practice class. So just like I practice viola, I have to practice, my piano stuff to make sure my chops are good to show Professor Galbraith. Now, what do I do with the free time that I'm not in class? Rest and recuperate, because I'm probably mentally drained after any of these things, for example, my lessons or orchestra. And then also practice. Practice. At least 3 hours a day if I can. Maybe even more if I'm feeling up to it or if I have the time to do so, because I have warm-ups, technique drills, repertoire for lessons, repertoire for repertoire class, and repertoire for orchestra. Not to mention homework for my academic subjects. So it's a lot to deal with. A lot of people say that a music major is easy, that you're playing your instrument all day. Even playing your instrument all day is hard enough if you are literally stuck on a 4-note phrase over and over and over. It does not matter if that's just a 4-note phrase. Unless it's in tune, it's not a good 4-note phrase. Or the fact that in addition to having an academic course load, you are also playing an instrument that you have to practice 3 to 4 hours a day. And sometimes that's not enough. And that is the argument that I always give people when they ask me, like, what's the hardest part about being a music major? It is literally the point I just mentioned. So I thought that this would be an interesting thing to talk about, because it's a conversation that always comes up at the dinner table if I'm meeting people or, just catching up with people, and people who are not familiar with what the curriculum of a music major is. This is what it entails, and you can kind of see that on a more broad scale in my week in the life of musician Rizwan video that you can see at the end. I hope this video was informative, and do keep in mind that this is specific to Carnegie, not really specific to Carnegie Mellon University. Every music school has some sort of format that is similar to this, maybe with some differences here and there. I do hope you enjoyed this video. Please give me a thumbs up if you liked it. Be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel if you have not done so already, and share this video with all your friends and family and encourage them to subscribe. Stay tuned for another video next week. Not sure what I'm going to do yet. Maybe that PSA will happen. Anyway, take care. Bye.